After a long break due to a COVID outbreak, Tottenham were finally able to get on the pitch again this past weekend. Of course, against some really tough opposition in Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool. So in this video, we're going to be looking at Tottenham in all phases of play, both in possession and out of possession. And then also how Mohamed Salah was able to be kept quiet by the likes of Ben Davies and Ryan Sessegnon. And I apologize, guys, if you do hear some gas noises in the background, it's not my body, it's literally the heater. That's just what happens when you live in Chicago. So a bit of context before I dive into the actual analysis of the game. Spurs came into this, and so did Liverpool, pretty much missing some key players due to either injury or COVID. Now, we don't know who specifically in Spurs squad had COVID, but we were missing pretty much the entire starting midfield and some defensive players as well. Whereas Liverpool were also missing some midfielders and some backline key members such as Virgil van Dijk, Fabinho, etc. For the most part, since Conte has come in at Tottenham Hotspur, he has been lining up the team in a 3-4-3 formation, which changes and evolves as play progresses, right? But against Liverpool, immediately right off the bat, he actually set up with a 5-3-2. So the biggest change there was moving from a double pivot to a three-man midfield in Ndombele, Dele Alli, and Harry Winks. Here we see Conte's 5-3-2 formation in action literally 30 seconds into the game. Really important to note that the midfield three would essentially rotate depending on where the progression of the ball was headed, whether it be the left, the center, or the right flank. But typically it was Harry Winks acting as the anchorman between Ndombele and Dele Alli. This was pretty tactically astute by Conte because Klopp's Liverpool are known to create dangerous opportunities in attack from the flank. I mean, if you just think about it, Sadio Mane, Mohamed Salah, Trent Alexander-Arnold, and Andy Robertson, four of the best players in the league right now, all playing through the flank, all creating opportunities and threats coming in from the sides. So in Conte's mind, he's thinking, hey, if I'm able to get Spurs to at least have numerical parity on the flanks, we can make sure that we're stifling Liverpool's main way of playing. And that's exactly what this 5-3-2 setup did. The ball near midfielder was able to be positionally close enough to support the ball near center back and also, of course, the wing back on that flank as well. In Tottenham's defensive pattern, we really start to see the flank be covered by a triangle of players. So in this particular case, Harry Winks has covered the midfielder's run as he runs into the space that is ready to be covered by Davinson Sanchez, who is the ball near center back. Emerson Royal, of course, for his part, as the wingback, is not only using his cover shadow to cover that dangerous space, but also pressure the Liverpool player on the ball, in this case, Sadio Mane. Keep in mind here that this numerical superiority is something that Tottenham was able to maintain throughout the match, both on the left and on the right side, and a big reason why Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane were not able to really have much effect on the game. Here's just one other example of the same situation being played out on the opposite flank, this time on the left side of Spurs. Tanguy Ndombele and Dele Alli are caught upfield due to a quick transition of play, and still that third man in midfield is helping maintain that numerical superiority, in this case Harry Winks with Ryan Sessegnon and Ben Davies. This makes it much more difficult for Liverpool's star player Mohamed Salah to really do anything of note because there's just no space to play into and he can't isolate one player. Interesting here is that if Jose Mourinho had played a three-man midfield, I think it just would have looked much more defensive than the three-man midfield that played against Liverpool. And I say that because under Conte, he had his three-man midfield protecting the back line, and you see like a straight line of those three players right in front of the back line, and one would push out and pressure the player on the ball if one of Kane and Son did not get back in time. This added insurance made it much more difficult for Liverpool to play through Tottenham's defensive blocks, number one. But also, it gave extra insurance because instead of having a two-man midfield and one step up, you had a three-man midfield and one stepped up, and you still had two others helping the back line. Here, after a quarter, Liverpool pass it backwards to recycle possession, and Harry Winks is tasked with pushing up to try to apply pressure. Of course, he doesn't actually get there, but it's okay if he pushes up because he has Dele Alli and Tanguy Ndombele to help out with the back line as well. So once again, it's just literally just comes down to simple numbers, right? You'd rather have two players helping out the defensive back line, especially against a team like Liverpool, than just one. And that's exactly what Conte's three-man midfield was able to help Tottenham do, as opposed to a two-man midfield that he typically runs. Here's another example, but on the opposite flank, with Dele Alli, the ball near midfielder, rushing in to pressure the ball carrier. One thing to note here is Emerson's positioning. Notice how much space he is giving Andy Robertson. I firmly believe that although extremely weird, but although Liverpool's men are most dangerous from the flanks, Conte believed in his players enough to be able to push them to the flanks. He wanted Liverpool to go out to the flanks because that's when that defensive triangle could be set up. That's when they could run into that trap. Really just can't be stressed enough how well Tottenham's midfield worked defensively. Winks was able to block 4 shots on goal, which is just phenomenal. Dele Alli got a couple of tackles in, but I think more impressively, he was able to help that left-hand side with Sessegnon keep Mohamed Salah quiet. Dele Alli committed 4 fouls on that left flank, on Liverpool's right flank, of course. And I really think that helped stifle the momentum that Liverpool had on that flank. And that's probably why they were forced to go the other way, just because they were finding no joy on that right flank. It's probably a really good transition to talk about Ryan Sessegnon's performance. I mean, not much to say apart from that it was phenomenal. 100% tackle rate, 6 out of 6. Definitely kept his left-hand side quiet, made sure that nothing came through that left-hand side. I think a combination of that 3-man midfield, those defensive triangles that I was talking about, and a stellar individual performance. I think it should be also said, Mohamed Salah just didn't have the best game individually, right? He looked a little bit tired. I think he's been playing a lot of football, kind of like when Son is clearly tired and is not performing incredibly well just because he plays so much. I think we caught Mohamed Salah at a great time, but take nothing away from Ryan Sessegnon at such a young age. Keeping a phenomenal player so quiet was absolutely key. And again, it was a combination of the system and an individual brilliant performance. Here we see that combination of individual brilliance and also the team structure helping keep Mohamed Salah quiet. I'm pretty sure Antonio Conte just told Ryan Sessegnon, you stick to Mohamed Salah like gum on a shoe, because Sessegnon would follow him everywhere. Even when Mohamed Salah tried to get some space by dribbling inside, Sessegnon followed him, of course, exposing that flank, but making sure that Mohamed Salah had no time on the ball to pick up his head and make a good, incisive pass. Of course, what's also helping here is, again, that 3-man midfield that's clogging up those passing lanes. So that was Tottenham out of possession. Now let's take a look at Spurs in possession and how they progressed the ball. On the ball, Spurs can be said, had a 3-5-2 with the wingbacks making the extra 2 numbers in the midfield. But I think it's important to note just how this 3-5-2 was structured, because Harry Winks was typically the one player that was deepest, not just defensively, but to progress the ball as well. And I think what we're seeing out of him is something that we haven't seen before, which is linking the defensive third and the middle third together, being that connector, if you will. He's doing the role extremely well, even in this past game against West Ham that occurred today. But of course, let's focus on Liverpool. So here we have that back 3 that's concave in order to make sure that the player that's furthest back, typically Eric Dyer, has space, has room to pick out a pass, etc., pick up his head. We also see Dele Alli and Tanguy Ndombele ready to support the flanks and run out to the sides. Now, Tanguy Ndombele, this is a pretty new position for him, and it's something that he didn't do quite well enough, whereas Dele Alli, this is his bread and butter. Dele Alli loves to make runs down the channel, and we see that time and time again throughout this game. In fact, this was one of the two things that stood out to me when Spurs were in possession. Number one, that Dele Alli was finding so much joy in that left-sided channel that Spurs kept exploiting that over and over again. So much so that in the second half, Conte told Eric Dyer and Davinson Sanchez, hey, just boot it long to the left side, make sure that Reguilon is able to get on it, and him, Davies, and Dele Alli can combine in order to create those passing patterns to progress the ball further up the pitch. Dele Alli was really, really good at that, and Spurs honed in on it. So that's one thing that I noticed. The other thing that I noticed was that the three-man midfield gave Spurs an extra man in midfield pushing the ball forward, specifically because Liverpool's midfield three was not as well organized. So here Son has dropped deep to collect the pass, dragging the Liverpool defender out of position. This opens up space for Dele Alli to run into, especially as Harry Kane receives a pass from Son. Now, with Dele making that run, he's dragging Trent Alexander-Arnold with him, creating then even more space for Ryan Sessegnon to run into. And that's really what Spurs depended on in that first half, is opening up space for the fullbacks, for the wingbacks to get up and exploit it, in either to work the ball into the box or just cross it in. As I watched the game back, it was really noticeable that Dele Alli kept trying to make these runs, whereas Tanguy Ndombele, it's just naturally not the way he plays, making those third man runs. So that's, I think, why the right side of Tottenham, in an attacking sense, just wasn't as potent as the left side. Not to mention that Emerson Royal is not as an attacking of a wingback as the likes of Reguilon or Sessegnon. That's not a problem, but it is something that was noticeable, and I'm not surprised that Tanguy Ndombele was taken off, simply because that role doesn't exactly suit him, even though he was able to pick up a really nice assist. This is all reflected in the stats of the overall game as well. As you can see here, Spurs definitely favored that left-sided flank for attacking rather than the right side or even the middle. The second thing I noticed about Tottenham in possession was that they were able to use that third man in midfield extremely effectively to switch the play and progress the ball. Even if it was just a lateral pass to get out of a tight situation, they were able to find what was typically Tanguy Ndombele in space and progress the ball through him. Now, this was only possible because Liverpool's own midfield three, Morton, Milner, and Keita, were a little bit at odds and ends, and typically one of them was just not where they needed to be. Here we see Tottenham's 2 out of 3 midfielders, Harry Winks and Dele Alli, are caught on the left-hand side, outnumbered by Morton, Keita, and Trent Alexander-Arnold. Tottenham are able to escape the space, and Harry Winks passes the ball onto Son, who spots Tanguy as a free man. He runs into the dangerous area, that middle part of the pitch, and is able to run through Liverpool's defense because James Milner is not able to read the danger in time and is not positioned well to keep Tanguy Ndombele quiet. With Harry Winks on the ball, 2 Liverpool midfielders are pressing up to try to either pressure Harry Winks or close the passing lanes behind them. Unfortunately, Morton is so far out of the picture that he's unable to affect the play. This leaves an extra man in midfield in Ndombele, and of course an extra man in the opposite flank in Emerson Royal, right? Because as soon as Tanguy Ndombele receives that ball, he can drive into the space, get the attention of Andy Robertson, the fullback that has to help closing down, and open up even more space for Royal to run into. This was really Tottenham's main way of attack in that first half and early on in the second half, exposing the flanks and giving their wingbacks room to run. So just to wrap up here, because I know this is already a pretty long video, Conte's midfield three made it possible for Tottenham to outplay Liverpool at home, both defensively and offensively. And that is such a massive achievement, especially because Conte has only been here for going on, a month and a half, and we're already seeing players play out of their skin for him and also show ability that Nuno wasn't able to get out of them, even Jose Mourinho wasn't able to get out of them. So if this is what 1 month under Conte looks like, I can't wait for the next 6 months. So that's it, guys. I'd love to hear your opinions and your thoughts on our tactical setup against Liverpool. What did you notice? Did you learn anything on this video? Did you not? Was it all incredibly obvious? I want to know it all. I am planning on releasing a very, very short 5 to maybe 8 minute video on the West Ham game, because I found a couple of substitutions that Conte made there very interesting, and I think link back to this midfield 3 idea quite well. But other than that, guys, typical YouTube stuff. Subscribe, comment, like, whatever. See you next time.